Chapter 11. Sked's Exodus.
"We have to leave right now,"
whispered Sked. His soft bass tone of voice carried a real sense of urgency.
"But Hildegard is far too weak to travel,"
exclaimed Fluffle, in his helium voice, speaking as fast as a bullet train. What Sked actually heard come out of Fluffle's mouth sounded something more like this.
"But Hildegard is far too weak to travel."
Hildegard was fast asleep and breathing unevenly.
"We have no choice,"
whispered Sked, as he gently picked up Hildegard and delicately slung her over his huge shoulders. Although she groaned in agony, she did not have the strength to open her eyelids.
"Dawn will be approaching soon,"
continued Sked. Based on his fellow Ryboltian's out-of-control psychotic reaction to the disappearance of Fluffle, he could only imagine how they would react when they discovered that Hildegard had also escaped. They would be absolutely furious and bent on revenge. They would not stop this time until Fluffle and Hildegard were captured and their co-conspirators exposed. All would then face the most gruesome of slow deaths. By the time the first rays of morning light had broken through, Sked and his companions were well and truly on their way. Despite carrying an awkward load on his shoulders, Sked moved at a blistering pace. Fluffle's little feet were struggling to keep up. Sked realised this and therefore decided to carry the furball as well. He looked quite a sight, with Hildegard slung across his shoulders and Fluffle in his open arms. As Sked passed by the last of the majestic gold trees, he felt a pang of sadness at the prospect of never getting to see this beautiful landscape again. However, he felt no sadness about the prospect of never getting to see his parents or siblings again. They were as evil as the rest of his kind, and he knew that they would happily watch him burn at the stake if captured. He could envision them all hurriedly collecting as much firewood as possible to feed the flames. Dawn broke, and the two sleepy Ryboltian guards awoke with great shock. Their prize had escaped. All hell soon broke loose. When they reported that Hildegard had escaped, their supervisor kicked them both in the backsides and cursed them and their families. Their supervisor, in turn, had his backside kicked by his manager. On and on it went, until a lot of Ryboltians were walking around with bruised backsides and dented egos. Every single Koolaboo and Lentina was lined up and whipped. Accusations were fired indiscriminately at any creature who dared to breathe or raise their heads. They were forced to stand dead still and at attention as the Ryboltians continued to assess the situation. By 11 a.m, it was boiling hot, and many of the older and weaker creatures were starting to faint. No mercy was shown. The fallen were whipped until they awoke, then dragged back to their feet. No food, drink, or medicine was permitted. It was Payne, a large Ryboltian torture expert, who noticed the distinctive Ryboltian footsteps leading away from the pole. Yet there were no Lentina footsteps in the immediate vicinity. This was very odd indeed. Flanked by 5 guards, he followed the Ryboltian footsteps all the way back to Sked's parents' house. Instead of ringing the doorbell, Payne kicked down the front door. Sked's dad, Dredd, rushed to the door with his baton drawn.
"Where are you hiding that pathetic Lentina girl?"
shouted Payne. Dredd was pinned down painfully by the guards as they rummaged through each of the 38 rooms. They forcibly evicted Sked's mum and his 4 brothers from their rooms. Sked's room was empty, and he was missing. There was no mistaking Sked's room. The walls were adorned with magnificent self-composed watercolours of the landscape. The desk was scattered with a variety of pressed flowers and leaves, and the floor was a bumpy mosaic of colourful riverstones.
"Where's the other girly son of yours?"
screamed Payne, breaking Dredd's podgy middle finger for good measure.
"The one they call Sked." I've no idea,"
screamed Dredd in agony, and cowered against the wall.
"Please don't break any more of my fingers." "How pathetic," continued Payne. "Your wimpy son does not even have a single weapon hanging from his wall. And what's with the arty-farty nonsense? What sort of father are you?"
Payne violently ripped the paintings from the walls and smashed the desk into hundreds of splintered pieces with an enormous sledgehammer.
"He's not my son," lied Dredd unconvincingly. We found the little runt roaming the streets when he was only 3. We brought him home in the hope that we would mould him into a good house slave." Don't lie!
screamed Pain, and broke several of Dread's toes with one downwards motion of the same sledgehammer.
He has exactly the same deformed nose as you.
By deformed, Pain meant that Dread's nose was not the normal flat, bath plug shaped common to most Ryboltian men. Instead, it protruded forward like a human nose. Whilst Dread cried and whimpered, Pain and his blood-hungry scoundrels plundered their way through the rest of the house. They noticed that one of the underground basement rooms showed signs of having been occupied. The bed's blankets were dishevelled, and eating utensils still had scraps of food on them. They also found large clumps of white koolaboo fur, and a few bloodied lentina scales on the floor. Sked's family were taken to the torture chambers for further, friendly discussions. For the next few hours, awful sounds reverberated through the town centre as stretching machine gears churned, skin peeler blades whirled, and acid showers sizzled. The sounds echoed throughout the town thanks to extremely powerful loudspeakers. Intimidation was the name of the game. 2 large search teams were organised. Team A consisted of 120 Ryboltians who would search the immediate vicinity of the town. Team B consisted of 50 Ryboltians who would venture beyond the town centre and keep venturing further and further until the escapees and their accomplice had been found. By the time Team B finally set off, Sked and his companions already had a 5-hour head start. All 3 of them were very weary by this point, and Sked therefore suggested that they stopped for a well-earned rest. Although Sked found carrying Fluffle and Hildegard all this way to be extremely exhausting, the freedom to engage in unrestricted dialogue with Fluffle managed to distract the intense feelings of pain that tugged at his enormous calves and shoulders. Both Sked and Fluffle believed that a higher force somewhere up there was looking out for them and guiding them every step of the way. They also both dreamed of living in a utopia where creatures of all colours, shapes and sizes could live in harmony.
Where you don't have to watch where you walk or ask for permission to breathe,
smiled Fluffle. His puppy dog eyes twinkled at the thought. Indeed, smiled Sked, where you can be yourself and even be appreciated for being yourself.
A place where everybody respects one another and sees the value in working together towards a common goal,
continued Fluffle. One day, sighed Sked ruefully. Whilst he was a dreamer, he was also a realist. Although Sked loved talking to Fluffle, it took a lot of concentration to comprehend what the fluffy soccer ball was saying most of the time, because the excitement of these topics made his words come out even faster and higher pitched than normal. Sked had to tell the exuberant little fellow to take a deep breath and slow down a number of times. As they rested, the leader of Team B, Murder, searched for any decisive foot trail. He finally came upon a fresh-looking set of Ryboltian tracks that continued well beyond the last of the gold trees in a northerly direction. Given that Ryboltians never ventured past this point, Murder was confident that he now had the fugitive's measure. There was no point venturing past this point unless you were trying to escape. The terrain suddenly became barren and dry. It was where the great river ended. If you kept walking north from this point, you eventually arrived at the land of the lonely. Murder and his team of thugs set off in haste. Although lazy by nature, the Ryboltians would always become very energetic when the smell of blood beckoned. Murder wanted to track down their bounty before they reached the land of the lonely. He did not want to confront any other creatures who lived here and who may show loyalty to Sked and his fugitive companions. You see, the Ryboltians were in fact enormous cowards. When confronted with creatures larger or more powerful than themselves, their heads would retract into their hollow chest cavities, and their hands would swing wildly as they screamed like hysterical banshees. The Ryboltians had not always been such big shots in their own territory either. Prior to them lethally poisoning the entire population of giant penrolls, who once shared the land with them, the koolaboos and the lentinas, the Ryboltians would cower and go into this ridiculous defense mode every time a gigantic penroll walked past. The sad fact is that although penrolls resembled 2-story high solid brick buildings, they were the most gentle of giants who wouldn't even harm a fly. They were fairly shy and tended to keep to themselves. Nonetheless, they were always courteous to their neighbours, and never used more of the land's resources than was necessary for survival. They always greeted the Ribaltians, Koolaboos and Lentinas, despite being treated with a mixture of aggression and loathe by the Ribaltians. They even took great care to avoid accidentally squashing any Koolaboos underfoot. It was only once the Penrolls had been exterminated that the Ribaltians started bullying the Koolaboos and enslaving the Lentinas. It was only then that they arrogantly changed the name of this territory from its original name, Land of the Golden Trees, to the new self-indulgent Ribaltia. Sked awoke Fluffle and Hildegard after only half an hour of sleep. Hardly refreshing, but they could not afford to take longer breaks. He had to assume that they were already being chased down. If he assumed otherwise, complacency would set in and they could all end up paying the ultimate price. Sked had heard the awful stories that the Ribaltians told about the Land of the Lonely. Although they made him very nervous, what other option did they have? It was the only inhabited land that they could get to by foot within a 200-kilometre radius. If they had ventured south, they would have had to travel a grueling 800 kilometres before eventually reaching the land of the Fluops. There was no way they would have made it that far, even if Fluffle and Hildegard had been in good shape. To travel such a distance, you needed hardy animals to either carry you or fly you. Furthermore, food and water sources were almost non-existent, and it was boiling hot by day and freezing cold by night. The path to the west was blocked by the great river, and the path to the east was blocked by the never-ending cliffs. They would just have to take their chances with the Land of the Lonely. At least it was a starting point. There were other lands that they could consider moving to once they'd reached this point.